Obviously, the one question is, everybody's asked me, why? I understand why Casey, why the boys, why your daughter.
Michael Wayne Jones was born on May 1, 1981, in the small town of Brattleboro, situated in Vermont, USA. While the identities of his parents remain unknown, it is evident that his family life was fraught with complexity and difficulty. From a tender age, Michael was a witness to the repeated physical and mental abuse between his parents, and he too was a victim of this mistreatment. These issues seem to be a tragic and enduring legacy, affecting both sides of his family. During Michael's early years, his father was incarcerated for reasons that are still unclear. This event deeply affected Michael, creating a profound sense of emptiness in his life. Seeking a fresh start, his mother remarried and had another son named Dana. Michael found some joy in having a sibling, but their home life remained far from ideal. His stepfather's inability to maintain steady employment placed the entire financial burden on his mother, who was forced to take on 2 jobs. Compounding their difficulties, Michael's stepfather exhibited aggressive behavior toward both him and Dana. The use of violent disciplinary methods created an environment of fear and oppression. If Michael arrived late to school or made a mistake, he was harshly punished, often locked in a shed, and subjected to sexual abuse. Despite the harshness of his life, Michael showed a generous and protective nature. In such dire circumstances, he often took on the role of protecting Dana, sometimes enduring punishments meant for his brother to spare him the pain. This courageous and loving behavior forged a strong bond between the brothers, with Michael becoming a figure of admiration for Dana. The stepfather's control was so stringent that Michael was rarely allowed to interact with other children from school or the neighborhood. His mother, living in fear of her husband, was unable to confront or oppose him. This created an atmosphere of isolation, secrecy, and oppression within the household. Without any external support, Michael and Dana had to endure the ongoing abuse. The bleak atmosphere of their home did not go unnoticed by the neighbors, who began to suspect the presence of abuse. On one occasion, driven by desperation, Michael ran away from home. But Michael had no clear destination, so he was eventually found by the authorities. When questioned about his reasons for leaving, he shared the difficult story of his family life. However, he received no assistance regarding his situation. Despite his efforts to appear fine to those around him, Michael's true feelings were hidden beneath the surface. As he entered adolescence, his low self-esteem significantly affected him, leading to a depression that required medical treatment. The only respite from his pain was his high school. There, despite his introversion and loneliness, Michael felt somewhat at ease as responsibilities helped him forget his oppressive home life. He was fortunate to meet Dorothy, who owned a nearby business. She introduced him to her daughter, whose name remains unknown. Michael formed a friendship with the girl, which eventually turned into an on-and-off relationship. This special connection allowed Michael to reveal a kind, affectionate, and protective side of himself. Dorothy was delighted by this new facet of Michael, but was also concerned. He always seemed on edge when it was time to go home. Although Dorothy's daughter often visited him, Michael did everything he could to keep her away from his house. With so many signs, Dorothy finally decided to delve deeper in her conversations with Michael. He then confided in her about his constant worry for his mother and brother's well-being. This allowed her to glimpse the emotional burden and anguish he carried. Their friendship provided Michael with a temporary respite from his difficulties, a space where he could express his feelings. After high school, Michael made a life-changing decision by joining the United States Navy. This marked the beginning of a new chapter, providing him with a clear purpose within a highly structured environment. As he developed a deep love and attachment for the Navy, Michael realized how right his choice had been. This sense of well-being was largely due to the new friendships he formed with his fellow servicemen. Despite occasionally drinking, he always showed up for work and proved to be a calm and relaxed individual. At the time, Michael was dating a fellow service member, whose name has been kept confidential. However, it became clear that the relationship was imbalanced, as she was physically abusive. This revived old shadows of his family environment. When his relapse into depression became evident, he decided to leave her. He then focused on excelling in his career, which included undergoing additional training to provide medical care in combat situations. This earned him an assignment with the Marines in a medical role. During this period, Michael met a young woman named Sarah. They fell in love and eventually got married. Following their marriage, Michael left the Marines to focus on his new role as a husband. Sarah played a crucial role in Michael's life, helping to keep him on the right path. Together, they welcomed 3 children, and Michael dedicated himself to being a good father, always striving to provide them with the best upbringing possible. Although Sarah took the lead in many decisions, Michael consistently supported her choices. Around 2011, Sarah found a job in Central Florida, specifically in Orange County, and the family relocated there. She worked at Mount Dora Animal Hospital, managed by Beau Delaporte. As weeks went by and Michael struggled to find a job, Sarah persuaded Beau to hire him, recognizing his work experience. Michael quickly adapted to his new responsibilities and demonstrated remarkable dedication. He always exuded joy, and it was evident to everyone that he loved his work, caring for animals and attending to their owners. His positive attitude made him highly sought after, with pet owners preferring his services. His employers grew very fond of him, especially Beau, who, beyond their professional relationship, extended his friendship and trust to Michael. Beau even began to delegate some management responsibilities of the animal hospital to him. Everything was going smoothly, and in 2014, Beau hired a new veterinary technician, Casey. Born on December 23, 1986, in the city of Ossian, Indiana, Casey was the second daughter of Nickley and David. Her siblings were Sarah and Brandy. From a young age, Casey was undoubtedly the heart of her home, her overflowing energy lifting everyone's spirits, even beyond her family. As she grew, Casey showed great love for others, driven by a special connection to her spirituality. No matter the challenges, her strength lay in her faith and personal values. During her time at high school, Casey met Richard. Initially, their attraction was mutual. However, after dating for a few weeks, Richard began to notice certain behaviors in her. Despite her kind side, Casey also exhibited jealousy and possessiveness. Her insecurity led to an abusive side, expressed through words and actions. Nonetheless, Richard persisted, and with patience and calm, they married after completing their studies. Over time, Casey's mother decided to move to Florida, and shortly after, Sarah and Brandy followed her. Given Casey's close relationship with her family, she and Richard also relocated to the same state in 2009. As they settled in, Casey found occasional jobs as a transporter and sometimes worked as a dog groomer while learning the trade of a veterinary technician. During this period, the couple welcomed their first child, Cameron, and their happiness was evident. Cassie showed immense maternal devotion, making Cameron's well-being her top priority. A few years later, their joy grew even more with the birth of their second child, Preston. The children thrived in an ideal environment, filled with laughter and the loving care of their parents. As Casey advanced in her veterinary technician career, she found a job at an animal clinic where she met Michael, who had become Beau's right-hand man. From the beginning, Michael and Casey got along exceptionally well, but Beau and his wife sensed that their apparent friendship hinted at something more. This attraction, despite being inappropriate given the circumstances, was undeniable for Michael, even at the risk of being discovered by Sarah. The inappropriate attraction affected Michael's focus at work, leading to a decline in his performance, although he was always eager to meet Casey's needs and requests. She reciprocated his attention, and it wasn't long before they embarked on an affair. Eventually, both decided to divorce their respective spouses. Sarah gained custody of their 3 children and moved to Jacksonville, while Casey and Richard agreed on shared custody with fixed schedules that Casey strictly adhered to. She took responsibility for transporting Cameron and Preston, diligently fulfilling her parental duties. Meanwhile, Beau grew increasingly frustrated with Michael's declining performance. Additionally, Michael made inappropriate advances toward other clinic employees. When Michael requested leave to travel to his hometown, claiming his mother's death, Beau later discovered it was a ruse for a beach vacation. This betrayal led Beau to terminate Michael's employment. In retaliation, Michael broke into the clinic, stealing money, computer equipment, and even a weapon. Beau identified Michael as the culprit and reported him to the police. With Casey's help, Michael fled to New Mexico but was eventually captured and brought to justice. However, after a brief stint in prison, he was released. Despite everything, Casey's trust in Michael remained unshaken. They soon moved in together, and Michael took on the role of stepfather to Cameron and Preston. By 2017, around Halloween, Michael and Casey finally tied the knot and moved into a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom trailer. Despite the limited space, the modest rent made them feel fortunate to have each other. That same year, they welcomed their first daughter, Mercali, followed by Ayana the next year. While Michael worked as a construction laborer to support their 4 children, Casey took pride in her role as a homemaker. She cherished every stage of her children's growth and sought ways to preserve those unique moments. This led her to create a YouTube channel to share special milestones of their family. On the surface, their life seemed idyllic, with Michael exuding calmness and Casey's laughter often heard in the background of their videos. However, behind closed doors, the couple frequently clashed, and their arguments had become a constant issue. Distrustful of Michael, Casey made a habit of checking his phone. She also grew suspicious whenever he worked long hours. On the night of July 10, 2019, while the children slept, a heated argument erupted between them. The trigger was Casey's discovery of a supposed infidelity on Michael's phone. The confrontation quickly escalated from verbal to physical. In a fit of rage, Casey grabbed a baseball bat and shoved Michael with it. Overcome with anger, Michael managed to wrest the bat from her and in a blind fury struck her repeatedly, ultimately killing her. Michael then placed Casey's body in a plastic bag and stored it in a closet. He attempted to clean up the scene as best as he could. The next morning, he decided to take further steps to avoid the children discovering what had happened. He loaded her remains into his car. In the following days, to avoid suspicion, Michael continued to share content on Casey's social media accounts. On July 26th, pretending to be Casey, he texted Richard asking him to take care of Preston and Cameron. He did the same with Casey's mother, instructing her to look after Mercali and Ayana. When Richard came to pick up Cameron and Preston, He found Casey's absence strange and voiced his concerns to Michael, who brushed it off, saying she had left town for a few days. Casey's mother had a similar reaction when she came for Mercalli and Ayanna. That same day, Michael called Sarah, telling her that he was separating from Casey and needed to see his children while she worked. Later, he picked them up and took them to his residence. During the drive, the children noticed a foul odor in the car, similar to rotting meat. For 2 weeks, Michael continued to drive between his home and Sarah's residence to visit his children, all while Casey's lifeless body remained in the car. As days passed without any word from her daughter, Casey's mother began to sense that something was wrong. On August 10th, Richard returned Cameron and Preston to Michael, and this time, Casey's absence caused him much greater concern. During their brief conversation, Michael apologized for being the cause of their divorce and acknowledged the challenges Richard had faced during his time with Casey. As the new school year approached, Michael realized that the absence of the children and Casey would raise questions from the elementary school staff. One night, on an unspecified date, he dragged Cameron out of bed and suffocated him, then placed his body in a suitcase. The next morning, he did the same with Preston, this time putting the body in a garbage bag. A few days later, the trailer park owner served Michael an eviction notice, giving him a maximum of 2 weeks to leave. Amid this grim situation, Michael went to pick up Mercalli and Ayanna. When Casey's mother saw him again, still without Casey, she had a nervous breakdown. Her mind was fixated on one question: where was her daughter? As Michael drove with the girls, he was suddenly overwhelmed with guilt. He felt he had no choice but to turn himself in at a police station. However, after lingering at the entrance for a while, he changed his mind and drove back home. Once there, he filled the bathtub with water and drowned Mercalli and Ayanna. After they stopped breathing, he placed their bodies in a plastic container. By early September, the approach of Hurricane Orion led to a state of emergency being declared in Florida. Many sought refuge in public shelters to protect themselves from the impending disaster. This situation provided Michael an opportunity to flee with the 5 bodies. He loaded them into his truck and drove north, planning to stay with Sarah and his children. Despite the ongoing emergency in Florida, Sarah never saw Michael call his wife or inquire about the children. This made her uneasy, but aware of the marital issues, she chose not to ask questions. After the hurricane passed, Michael's neighbors reported a foul smell coming from the trailer to the property owner. Assuming the Jones family had already left, the owner first peeked through the windows and then entered the trailer. Aside from the furniture and personal belongings, nothing seemed amiss, but the stench was unbearable. By this time, Casey's, desperate to find an explanation for her daughter's absence, speculated that Michael might be in trouble with the law again and was hiding. She concluded that her daughter might be in hiding for safety reasons, but instead of staying idle, she contacted the sheriff's office to request a welfare check on Casey. When the officers conducted the welfare check, they found the house empty and seemingly recently cleaned. However, the presence of cleaning supplies near the door contrasted with the persistent smell of decomposition. Despite this, the property owner arrived and asked the officers to leave. Meanwhile, with the body still in his vehicle, Michael left Sarah's house and drove across the state border into Georgia. There, near a wooded area, he disposed of Cameron, Preston, Mercalli, and Ayanna. While driving on the highway and checking his GPS, Michael lost control of his vehicle and crashed. Surprisingly, he emerged unscathed, but the vehicle was completely wrecked. Police officers quickly arrived at the scene and immediately noticed the terrible odor coming from the truck. When they opened the suitcase, they were met with a horrifying sight: Casey's remains. There, on the roadside and under the shocked gaze of the authorities, Michael confessed in detail to his gruesome actions, including the location of the children. Consequently, he was taken into custody. Upon hearing the news, Casey's family felt as though their world had collapsed. In a state of shock, they could not stop asking themselves how a human being could inflict so much harm on others, especially on babies. For the first time in her life, Sarah experienced hatred towards someone, as she later stated. However, the thought that Casey might have witnessed her children's deaths caused her the most pain. Based on the findings and armed with a search warrant, the agents returned to Casey's residence. Upon entering, besides the smell, they noticed a reddish stain on the carpet. They prepared to collect evidence at the scene. Meanwhile, the autopsies were being performed. According to the forensic report, Cameron had a fractured jaw but no other visible signs of trauma. However, a towel was found in his mouth. Preston had a noose around his neck. Mercalli and Ayanna were found together in a small plastic bag containing a baby bottle labeled Ayanna and a pair of pink sandals. Both had died by drowning. As for Casey, there was crushing on the front of her skull and face, indicating a blow with a blunt object, but no other traumas were found on her body. Michael agreed to be interviewed by the officers, and during the process he remained calm and precise in his responses, making no attempt to deceive the agents. On the contrary, Michael thanked the officers for capturing him, stating that there was nothing more he could do given the circumstances. Calmly, he then recounted the events chronologically, from the night of the fight with Casey to his subsequent arrest. When asked about the motive behind his actions, Michael responded that everything had accumulated in his life to the point where it seemed like the best and only way out. Beyond the logical impact of such a tragedy on everyone involved, it was particularly hard and cruel for Sarah to accept that her own children had been exposed to and lived with a man like Michael. Understandably, after learning the facts, Sarah suffered from mental health issues. Michael was charged with second-degree murder for Casey's death and 4 additional counts of first-degree premeditated murder for the deaths of the children. He pleaded guilty. This plea avoided a trial, moving the case directly to the sentencing phase. In this phase, a jury of 12 people had to decide between life imprisonment or the death penalty. As part of their strategy, the defense focused on Michael's difficult childhood and his mental health issues, presenting various psychological disorders as mitigating factors. However, the state prosecutors argued that the undeniable brutality of the case warranted the death penalty. In January 2023, the jury unanimously recommended the death penalty in accordance with state law. During a brief 9-minute hearing, the judge sentenced Michael for his crimes. Additionally, he was given life without parole for Casey's murder. Michael's lawyer immediately filed the necessary paperwork to appeal the sentence. Despite this last effort on Friday, April 28, 2023, the judge upheld the previous sentence. Prosecutors expressed their satisfaction with the justice served for the victims' families. As he awaits execution, Michael remains behind bars. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.
This guy came out and I tried to hold her and she's breathing. She doesn't have a heartbeat.
So now, what do you do when you realize that she's not going to make it?
I have to bury her. I couldn't tell anybody.
Kim and Scott Richardson had a happy marriage, and their love and commitment brought their firstborn Skylar into the world on March 9, 1999. Later, they welcomed Jackson. Both children grew up in a peaceful environment. Weekends were family bonding times at home. Neighbors often saw them in their backyard, where Kim and Scott would grill food and work in the garden. Skylar and Jackson enjoyed playing with the family dogs, their laughter filling the air. Family celebrations, including birthdays, holidays, and graduations, took place around bonfires in the yard, which had witnessed countless joyful moments. It was a refuge of peace. No one could have imagined that in this backyard, amidst the Richardson family's happiness, an unutterable secret was buried. As Skylar grew older, weight and diet, issues that sometimes hide behind a seemingly perfect facade, played a central role in her life. These concerns became her obsession, leading to unexpected and painful situations. For Kim, the impact of these issues was undeniable. Her worry began in Skylar's early adolescence when her daughter already showed signs of eating disorders. At 12 years old, Skylar was obsessed with calories, refusing to buy gum because it added 5 calories to her diet. She attended high school in Ohio, excelling as a cheerleader. Being a cheerleader required her to be small and agile, traits she had, making her a perfect flyer. This role involved performing aerial stunts and holding complex poses for a few seconds before returning to the ground. However, the pressure to stay thin marked the beginning of Skylar's struggle with her weight. Her obsession with not gaining even a gram led to dangerous behaviors like induced vomiting, but when the cheerleading season ended, Skylar would binge eat. She then subjected herself to severe fasting periods. Discussing her weight was a taboo topic in the family, and Skylar's extremely reserved nature made addressing the issue difficult. The Richardsons sought professional help, including doctors, therapists, and nutritionists, but no intervention seemed to ease her suffering. Skylar was diagnosed with body dysmorphia, a disorder characterized by an obsession with perceived physical flaws. Amid her dissatisfaction with herself, she became increasingly reserved and kept numerous secrets, deeply worrying her parents. However, from the outside, everything seemed perfect at home. Skylar was seen as a beautiful and popular young woman during her high school years, excelling as a cheerleader and radiating vitality and joy in her school community. Her younger brother Jackson was on the football team at the same school, which contributed to the Richardson family's reputation as exemplary. In late July 2016, just before her senior year of high school, Skylar started a relationship with a friend's cousin, but it ended quickly. However, in January 2017, she found a new love, Brandon, a junior at her school. Skylar seemed happy and even appeared to be gaining weight, which gave her family hope. This change suggested that Skylar had her eating disorder under control. Her choice of a form-fitting dress for prom and her healthy appearance increased her parents' confidence in her well-being. In March, Skylar even went on a family vacation, wearing a 2-piece bikini showing some curves. Skylar and Brandon's relationship seemed to be going well, and her mother's concerns led her to address a sensitive topic: pregnancy. Kim wanted Skylar to take measures to protect herself, so she took her to the gynecologist in April. At this point, Skylar was 18 years old, so she went into the exam room alone. What should have been a routine visit for a contraceptive prescription turned traumatic for Skylar. Her tears as she left the office indicated something troubling, but Kim assumed it was due to it being her first visit, which can be emotional and somewhat invasive for a reserved girl like her daughter. Little did her mother know that the cause of her tears was a shocking revelation. The doctor informed Skylar that she was pregnant, And not just newly pregnant, she was already 8 months along. Skylar desperately asked the doctor to keep this secret as her parents couldn't know. 9 days after the gynecologist visit on May 5, 2017, Skylar attended prom with Brandon. Despite being in her advanced pregnancy, her form-fitting dress fit her surprisingly well. It's worth noting that she had tried on the same dress in February, and it fit the same 3 months later. Apparently, she hadn't gained any weight in those 90 days, which is highly unusual for someone so far along in pregnancy. Perhaps that's why no one noticed the secret that was about to change her life forever. Less than 48 hours after attending prom, nature took its course, and it was time for the baby to be born. In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar gave birth to a small baby girl in the bathroom of the Richardson home. The newborn, apparently lifeless, became a dark secret that Skylar feared her parents would discover. In a panic, she decided to bury the baby in the backyard of their home. No one knew about this incident. In the weeks that followed, Skylar continued her life, outwardly acting as if nothing had happened. She didn't tell anyone about the tragic event that haunted her. In July 2017, she visited her gynecologist again and asked for a contraceptive prescription. As expected, the doctor asked what had happened with her pregnancy. She replied that her baby had been stillborn and that she had buried the body in the backyard of her family's home. Unbeknownst to her, revealing this secret set justice in motion, the police received a concerning call from a doctor who reported that after a gynecology and obstetrics consultation, a patient had given birth at home and buried the baby in the backyard. This call triggered a series of events that shook the Richardson family to its core. Kim and Scott were taken aback when the police arrived at their door on July 14, 2017. It was a sunny summer day, and Skylar was at her grandmother's pool, enjoying happy moments with her boyfriend and cousins. She had no idea they were coming for her. The family was entirely unaware of the gravity of the situation when the police contacted them. According to Scott's later statements, the police assured them that they only wanted to talk to Skylar about something she might have witnessed and insisted she was not in any trouble. Trusting those words, Scott took his daughter to the police station without proper legal representation, an action he would later consider one of the biggest mistakes of his life. On that same July 14th, when Scott accompanied his daughter to the police station, he had no idea that she had been hiding such a dark secret. At the station, the officers asked him to wait outside since Skylar was an adult. Inside an interrogation room, a police officer read Skylar her rights and began pressuring her to reveal what had happened with her baby.
So just kind of help me, walk through this. So what did you do? I guess, is your bedroom upstairs or bathroom upstairs? Okay, so you had to walk downstairs?
I had to clean myself up a little.
Are you carrying her?
Yes.
Did you go into the garage, or do you have an outdoor shed where you have a shovel?
I have my garage.
The family was about to face a crisis that would impact their lives in unimaginable ways. In the small interrogation room, Skylar finally shared the truth with the investigators.
Please, just be honest, what's going to happen?
I don't know, okay? I'm in here observing.
Jail?
No. You're not going to jail. No.
No, and I'm not going to.
Just relax, okay? Listen, just relax, okay?
I don't want to go to jail.
I know you don't. Just relax,
I don't have to go to jail, though, right?
Listen, I understand that you're sorry, and I understand that you're upset, and I understand that you didn't want this to happen, okay? Just take some deep breaths, okay? Things will be okay.
I don't have to go to jail.
You're not going to jail.
In the early hours of May 7th, Skylar faced the unimaginable alone in her bathroom. She gave birth to a baby who showed no signs of life. She held the newborn for hours, hoping for a miracle that never came. Resigned to the heartbreaking reality and ensuring not to wake her family, she quietly buried her daughter in a makeshift grave in their backyard using a small garden trowel. During a tense interrogation that followed, the investigator eventually disclosed to Skylar's parents, Scott and Kim, the grave reason for their daughter's questioning. Shocked by the news and unable to comprehend how they had missed the signs of her pregnancy, they listened as Skylar shared the baby's name, Annabelle, and revealed the brief relationship with the father, a cousin of a friend from the previous summer. This revelation devastated her mother, Kim, who later expressed her anguish over the pain Skylar had endured alone. As the family absorbed this new reality, investigators were already moving towards their home to dig deeper into the case, unbeknownst to them. The small town quickly buzzed with the news as police activity spiked in an area unaccustomed to such attention, drawing national media to the story of the troubled young cheerleader. That same day, authorities exhumed the remains of baby Annabelle for forensic examination. After enduring over 5 hours of grueling questions at the station, Skylar and her parents were allowed to go home. However, the respite was short-lived. 6 days later, the investigators returned with unsettling news from the autopsy. There were signs of charring on Annabelle's bones, suggesting she had been burned, which led them to suspect homicidal violence. On July 20th, 2017, during a second intense interview without her legal or parental support, Skylar was directly accused by police of killing and burning her baby. Throughout the interview, she steadfastly refuted the allegations, denying any use of heat or fire 17 times, and insisting 29 times that Annabelle was stillborn, maintaining her innocence against the grave charges laid before her.
Did you hear any crying after? Or did you hear any little crying? Okay.
Under the intense pressure of the interrogation, Skylar eventually changed her story, admitting that she might have partially burned the baby's body. When asked if the baby had made any noises at birth, she hesitantly mentioned that there might have been a sound. After an hour of intense questioning, the detectives decided they had enough to arrest her and charged her with reckless homicide, suspecting the baby had suffocated. Skylar was released on bail, but this was just the beginning of her legal battles. The prosecutor publicly laid out the charges: aggravated murder, which could lead to a life sentence, involuntary manslaughter, child endangerment, and abuse of a corpse. He argued that Skylar's actions were driven by her family's desire to maintain a perfect facade. Despite these heavy accusations, Skylar's parents, Kim and Scott, remained determined to clear her name with the help of their lawyers. Scott voiced his frustration over how the police had misled them from the beginning, telling them Skylar wasn't in trouble, only to detain her and search their home for evidence once they brought her to the station. Kim described the ordeal as a nightmare, noting how Skylar's arrest reignited her struggles with eating disorders and psychological stress. The legal drama attracted intense media scrutiny and public speculation, resulting in a gag order, although by then the Richardsons were already facing widespread criticism and hostility. Online and outside their home, the family endured harsh criticism, protests, and threats, feeling under constant surveillance and harassed by people who distorted their images online. Amid this turmoil, they hired experienced defense attorneys who contended that Skylar's confession was coerced. The case took a twist when the pathologist who initially reported charring on the baby's remains withdrew her statement, confirming there was no evidence of burning. Despite this new evidence, the prosecutor stood firm on the charges, insisting on the validity of Skylar's initial admissions during the interrogation. However, the defense succeeded in getting Skylar placed under house arrest. At home, surrounded by books and her dogs, she tried to find some peace under a pine tree where her parents had placed an angel ornament at the burial site of her baby, whom she called Angel. In a reflective interview, Scott explained that from Skylar's perspective, she was handling the sudden and tragic event the best she could, believing the baby was stillborn. He detailed how she tenderly placed the baby in the ground and marked the spot with a flower. As time passed, her dreams of attending the University of Cincinnati had to be put on hold. The uncertainty of her future weighed heavily on her and her family. However, the prosecution viewed this as her undergoing the justice process that was deemed necessary, aiming to seek justice for the baby. The case itself was fraught with tension and division. Kim, Skylar's mother, voiced her frustrations with the legal process, feeling that the defense's points were completely disregarded by the prosecution, which she found to be exceedingly cold and dismissive. The prosecution maintained that an innocent life had been unjustly taken, and it was their duty to seek reparation. In July 2019, the case took an unexpected turn when the prosecutor offered Skylar a deal: drop the aggravated murder charge if she pleaded guilty to the remaining charges, thus avoiding a trial but still facing up to 15 years in prison. This proposal brought immense anguish to the Richardson family, but ultimately, the decision rested with Skylar. On one decisive Sunday morning, Skylar resolved not to plead guilty to crimes she maintained she did not commit. She chose to let a jury decide her fate at trial. 2 years after the distressing events, the trial began on September 3, 2019. The prosecution started with a startling revelation, quoting a text message from Skylar to her mother that exposed her troubled emotional state shortly after she secretly gave birth and buried the baby in the backyard. The prosecution also displayed a selfie Skylar had taken at the gym that same day, using these pieces to argue that Skylar had no intention of keeping the baby. Although proving the baby was born alive was a challenge, the prosecution contended that Skylar's own admissions during interrogation supported their case. Witnesses for the prosecution testified that Skylar had seen the baby's arms move and heard her make sounds, suggesting life. They also claimed Skylar might have inadvertently harmed the baby. Moreover, they accused her of trying to burn the baby's remains. Trey Johnson, presented as the baby's father, testified about their brief relationship and the unprotected sexual encounters they had. When it was time for the defense, Skylar's lawyers argued that she had been subjected to overly aggressive questioning, leading to a coerced confession. They disputed the assumption that she had attempted to burn her baby, noting that the forensic expert who initially supported this claim had later withdrawn it. They presented evidence of Skylar's significant weight fluctuations due to her long-standing battle with anorexia, which they claimed was exacerbated by her mother's pressure to remain thin. During the trial, the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the baby died from homicidal violence of undetermined origin. Yet, under cross-examination, she admitted there was no physical evidence to support a live birth, or that Skylar had directly caused harm to her child. Witnesses for the prosecution also acknowledged the lack of physical evidence of a live birth, with no trauma or burns found on the baby's remains. The defense stressed that the only evidence suggesting a live birth came from Skylar's statements, which they argued were the result of coercion by the police. An obstetrician also testified that he didn't believe the baby was alive at birth. He noted that the umbilical cord wasn't cut, which might mean it came off before or during delivery. He also mentioned how Skylar described the baby as extremely pale, not looking like a healthy newborn. He suggested that Skylar's eating disorder might have limited the baby's growth in the womb, possibly leading to a stillbirth or death shortly after birth. An expert on police questioning explained that some interrogation techniques can push people into false confessions, especially those who are more vulnerable to pressure. A clinical psychologist who talked to Skylar found she has a dependent personality disorder, which could make her more likely to give in to authority figures. The trial moved forward with both sides presenting their arguments and evidence. The defense attorney emphasized that Skylar is innocent until proven guilty, urging the jury to stand by her if they had any doubts about the baby's condition at birth. The prosecution argued that Skylar had ended a life to keep up appearances and should be held accountable. The trial was intense, and eventually the jury had to decide Skylar's fate.
With regard to count one, we, the jury in the above captioned case, find the defendant, Brooke Skylar Richardson, not guilty of the offense of aggravated murder.
On September 12, 2019, after 4 hours, they ruled she wasn't guilty of the most serious charges, but did find her guilty of improperly handling the baby's remains, which could mean up to a year in jail. The Richardson family was relieved by the verdict but had to wait until sentencing. The next day, Skylar spoke publicly for the first time in court, expressing regret and apologizing for the pain caused by her actions. During a victim impact statement, Trey Johnson's mother spoke about her deep loss, saying no words could fully express her anguish over her granddaughter Annabelle's death. The judge believed different choices by Skylar could have saved her daughter, but sentenced her to 3 years of probation instead of a harsher penalty. The trial and its aftermath deeply affected Skylar and her family, causing her significant stress and health issues. 2 months after being mostly acquitted, Skylar shared her feelings in an interview with Cosmopolitan magazine. She talked about her regrets and the burden of guilt she carries every day for not opening up sooner about her situation. She described the period as devastating and admitted to struggling with depression since the incident. Skylar shared that she named her baby Annabelle because she didn't know anyone else with that name. She visits Annabelle's grave every week to leave pink flowers and finds a bit of peace knowing her baby is at rest. During an interview, Skylar opened up about how the trial almost broke her and even made her think about ending her life. She admitted that living with the truth was incredibly hard, especially when it felt like everyone else thought differently. She also felt like she lost a part of herself during the trial and was scared that people saw her as guilty because of all the news coverage. Trey, Annabelle's dad, told the media that he was shocked by the case because he didn't know about the pregnancy beforehand. It hit him hard when he found out months later in 2018, especially learning about it through social media when everything went public. Trey's family deeply felt the loss, and after the trial, they gathered to mark 2 years since Annabelle's passing. This whole situation really affected everyone involved. They all dealt with a lot of emotions no matter how the court ruled. Over time, Skylar got help for her eating disorders, went to college, and worked at the law firm that represented her. Her probation ended almost 2 years early in 2020. The judge decided there was no need to keep an eye on her since the crime wasn't severe. She had no prior offenses, and she was busy with work and school. In Skylar's first TV interview, her parents talked about how the case impacted them and their daughter. They mentioned a special angel marker at Annabelle's gravesite, expressing how heartbreaking it all was and how sometimes being near the grave brought them a little comfort. They also revealed that Skylar was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, suffering from frequent panic attacks and nightmares that often kept her from sleeping in her own room. In 2022, Skylar's lawyers tried to seal the court records of her conviction to help her move on, arguing that the public didn't need to see them anymore. But the prosecutors disagreed, saying it would lessen how serious her actions were. The judge ultimately decided to restrict access to the records, siding with Skylar's need for privacy, which stirred up new debates. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations. Don't be fooled by images of this young man with a visibly beaten face. The reality is, he has caused a real tragedy. James Lloyd Allen was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, on August 29, 1954. He was one of 3 children born to Lloyd James Allen and Jacqueline Allen, with siblings named Danny and John. The Allens were a typical middle-class family, closely knit and active members of St. Thomas Church. The only out-of-the-ordinary aspect was Lloyd's job. He was a police captain in Providence. As a child, Allen admired his father and the idea of doing things right, though he still found time for some mischief during his school years. Allen is remembered by his family and friends for secretly listening to his favorite baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, on a radio earpiece during class, hoping the nuns wouldn't notice. Growing up with strong values of service, he eventually followed in his father's professional footsteps. His faith also remained a crucial part of his life. By the late 1970s, during weekly prayer meetings at St. Thomas Church, Allen's attention was drawn to a woman named Marge, who was from Bristol and 4 years his senior. Despite the daily demands of his police work, Allen was too shy to approach her. However, fate intervened when Marge was robbed and contacted the police. It turned out her home was in the area Allen patrolled. When responding to the call and finally meeting her, he found himself in a comfortable role. After taking her statement, he made several follow-up visits which led to dating. They married in 1988 at St. Thomas Church. She was 38 and he was 34. Allen and Marge had different personalities, but they shared the same core values and a deep love for each other. This love was the foundation of their wonderful family. They had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Caitlin. Allen wasn't the handiest person around the house, but he was a dedicated dad who adored his daughters more than anything. To support his family, he also worked a second job as a security guard at a supermarket on the east side of the city, which allowed Marge to stay home and take care of their daughters. Their marriage was mostly peaceful. They enjoyed staying in to watch TV or play with their daughters rather than going out. The only real disagreement at home was about baseball, since Marge was a big Yankees fan and she passed that passion on to her daughters. So, whenever they watched games together, there was a bit of a friendly rivalry. As the girls grew up, Marge started working at St. Thomas School. James, on the other hand, was all in on his job in public service, truly embodying what it meant to be an excellent police officer. His co-workers and friends saw him as a man of integrity, with a lot of compassion for crime victims and a knack for solving crimes. His amazing memory and observational skills, along with his resilience and courage, were what made him stand out. He always went the extra mile and was ready to answer calls even in the middle of the night. By 2005, he had become one of the most seasoned detectives in the department, honored with numerous medals, including the Departmental Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Known for his signature trench coat, rain or shine, James brought laughter and comfort to Marge and their friends. Meanwhile, Esteban Carpio lived nearby and seemed to be on the wrong side of the law. Born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 30, 1978, to an unknown father, Esteban was raised by his mother, a third-grade teacher. There isn't much known about his early years. As an adult, he worked as a barber and had a history of legal troubles related to substance possession. In the early 2000s, he started a relationship with Samaine Finn. They later had a daughter together. Esteban's behavior started to change for the worse in late 2004. He began acting oddly, claiming to hear voices and believing that a friend had cursed him or used voodoo on him. Whether true or not, his girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple for help, where a monk tried to protect him by tying a rope around his waist. But it didn't help, and his condition didn't improve, so his mother called for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors linked his issues to stress and substance abuse, but it's unclear if any steps were taken to address his substance use. The following year, with no improvement in his condition, his mother, Yvonne Carpio, took him back to the hospital. That spring, Esteban crossed paths with Madeline Gata, an 84-year-old active woman who loved her craft of sewing. She had worked as an interior decorator and had created custom designs for various clients. She was also a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. On April 16, 2005, after finishing work early in the afternoon, Detective James grabbed a quick bite at a favorite spot before heading home. Meanwhile, Esteban, who was driving nearby, spotted Madeline. Seeing her as an easy target, he quickly got out of his car with a knife. He tried to steal her purse but ended up hurting her with the knife. Her screams alerted people nearby, and one quick-thinking neighbor noted Esteban's car license plate as he ran away. Madeline was taken to a health center where she managed to report what happened. Around 7 in the evening, James's phone rang at home, and he promptly answered. The call was about the attack on the elderly woman and the suspect's clear description, prompting the detective to spring into action. The police team, including James, arrived at Esteban's residence the next day. According to statements from Esteban's family, they warned the officers that Esteban was experiencing a mental crisis, having trouble sleeping, and was not in his right mind. Minutes later, he was taken to the Providence police station for questioning. Once there, he was led to a conference room on the 3rd floor and, as he was not under arrest, his handcuffs were removed. Detective James, assisted by another detective, began the interrogation. James was armed, as per regulation. Initially, Esteban provided a false name, denied any previous arrests, and claimed innocence. When Detective James warned him that he knew his real identity and was aware of his criminal record, Esteban became agitated and asked the other detective for some water. After the other detective left the room, Esteban managed to seize James's gun under unclear circumstances and lock the door from the inside. Timothy, the other detective, later recounted hearing Detective James screaming for help, saying Esteban was going to kill him. Shots were heard, and when they finally broke down the door, they found James dying from 2 fatal wounds, one to the chest and another to the forehead. Esteban had attacked the detective with his own gun and escaped by shooting out a window in an adjoining room, falling onto the grass below. A chaotic scene ensued outside the police headquarters as local, state, and federal officers launched a relentless citywide manhunt for the suspect. Meanwhile, James was rushed to Providence Hospital, but despite all medical efforts, he was declared deceased. Esteban was apprehended after an hour-long search, following a violent confrontation with a taxi driver. His capture was not easy. He was combative and violent. The police officers struck him 3 times in the face. From there, the officers took him to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was administered sedatives and later interviewed. The exchange was captured on a recording that clearly showcased Esteban's distressed voice. At the same time, the doorbell rang at the Allen home. While their daughter slept, Marge went downstairs to find 3 officers at the door. She invited them in, and they delivered the tragic news inside. Marge, stunned, asked where it had happened. Learning it was at the police station, she couldn't believe it. Of all places, that should have been the safest for a police officer. From that moment, her mind struggled to function normally, and the pain hit her hard. The officers called friends of the Allens to stay with the girls and then escorted Marge to the hospital in a patrol car, as only a direct relative could claim the body. She later recounted how the hospital corridors were filled with police officers, all nodding respectfully as she passed. They led her to the trauma room. Her husband lay on the table. The wounds were lethal, yet not visible. On Monday, April 18, 2005, at 10 a.m., a second interview took place at police headquarters. A hysterical Esteban was interrogated again. During the interview, Esteban often rambled, insisting he was insane and unloved. This exchange was also recorded. Meanwhile, the police chief and James's colleagues gathered at the Providence District Court, awaiting Esteban's arraignment. Beyond showing solidarity and affection for their fallen comrade, they wanted to see the man capable of such actions. The tension in the room was palpable as all eyes turned to Esteban, who walked with difficulty, his hands and feet shackled. Several officers escorted him. He had bruises and cuts on his face and wore a white mask covering from his chin to his eyes, making him resemble Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The moans and screams of his mother and girlfriend soon followed. His mother immediately accused the police of beating her son. Officials struggled to remove both women from the courtroom as they continued to cry out about cover-ups and police brutality. Esteban's face was bleeding and sweating. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks, forehead, and skull area were severely bruised. His face was marred with multiple bruises and scars. However, such a mask, known as a spit shield, is used by law enforcement when a suspect is injured or combative. Due to Esteban's previous state, the officers decided to take maximum precautions and placed a spit shield on him. They explained that he had injured a leg, an arm, and his head when he jumped out of the window. When accused of murder, he responded by nodding, not denying the crime committed. He only spoke to tell his mother he loved her as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Subsequently, Esteban was detained without bail. Given that the victim was an on-duty police officer, the charge carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As is common in such cases that shock the public, a press conference led by the police chief was necessary. However, many questions remained unanswered as he did not explain how Esteban managed to seize the officer's gun or the details leading up to the sequence of gunshots. He also did not discuss weapon-carrying protocols within police facilities or associated interrogation procedures, nor did he mention if there were any witnesses. Instead, he expressed heartfelt words for Detective James. James was posthumously promoted to the rank of Detective Sergeant. On April 21, 2005, a sea of police officers and officials accompanied the procession preceding his funeral service. Although it could have been held at the downtown cathedral, Marge chose differently, faithful to the story that had always connected them to St. Thomas Church. The funeral service was held there. After the religious ceremony, James was taken on a 4 miles final journey to St. Anne's Cemetery by a horse-drawn carriage. Marge was moved to see thousands of people, including police officers from across the country, lining the route. Beyond the crime and ensuing mourning, the case of the detective brought to the forefront a long-standing concern. the security in government buildings. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. For some time, visitors to the Providence Police Building had to pass through a metal detector. What no one had anticipated was that an individual would disarm an officer of his service weapon. In this context, Michael Brady, a police procedures expert and professor at the University in Newport, Rhode Island, mentioned that it was not unusual for a detective to interrogate a suspect while armed. Thus, James was not doing anything different from what police officers do daily across the country. However, the controversy over alleged police abuse against Esteban dominated headlines and online news portals. Later, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation (FBI) concluded that there was no excessive force by the Providence police, who were compelled to subdue the man due to his violent behavior. It was a special agent from the FBI who presented the report to the press, adding that if the subject resisted the police officers, they were fully justified in using whatever force necessary to subdue him. Despite these claims, Esteban's family continued to insist on the accusations against law enforcement and highlighted Esteban's mental disorder.
It's police brutality. He was mentally ill and he needed help and we couldn't get it. We tried and tried. And he didn't deserve this.
And in fact, his defense team centered their strategy around his mental disturbance. During the trial preparations, Esteban was evaluated by several mental health experts. The defense enlisted a psychiatrist and forensic neuropsychologist. After reviewing Esteban's medical records from hospital visits prior to the incident and listening to tapes of post-arrest interviews, these specialists concluded that the accused suffered from schizophrenic psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. The state's evaluation was conducted by neuropsychologist and professor David Faust and forensic psychiatrist and psychiatry professor Martin Kelly. Insanity defenses are used in a small fraction of U.S. criminal cases and are rarely successful. According to experts in psychiatry and law, jurors might be skeptical that mental illness absolves someone from a crime or fear that a not guilty verdict could ultimately release a dangerous individual back into society. Esteban was charged with assaulting Madeline, the 84-year-old woman with a knife, as well as the murder of James. The trial began in June 2006. In his opening statement to the jury, the defense attorney acknowledged that the evidence of his client committing the actions was overwhelming. However, the key question for him was whether Esteban was too disturbed to be held fully accountable. One of the first witnesses was a police officer who admitted during his testimony that Esteban had been beaten during the arrest. On June 19th, the accused's mother and his 24-year-old girlfriend testified about Esteban's alarming behavior prior to the incidents. Following their testimonies, 2 doctors took the stand. Both specialists argued that the accused lacked the capacity to commit the crime due to the severe effects of schizophrenia, and thus should not be held fully responsible. The next day, the state countered by presenting Professor David and forensic psychiatrist Martin. Professor David testified that he had examined the results of psychological tests administered to the accused while he awaited trial at the Adult Correctional Institute and concluded that the administration of the test and subsequent results were questionable and that Esteban's responses indicated feigning and malingering. Forensic psychiatrist Martin then testified that, at the time of the crimes, Esteban did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that would have prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions or conforming his conduct to the requirements of the law. In summary, they described him as manipulative, with a pronounced criminal and antisocial profile. After about 9 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and delivered their verdict, finding Esteban guilty of first-degree murder of Detective James. He was also found guilty of firing a weapon during a violent crime that resulted in death and of assaulting Madeleine with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, the cries of Esteban's family members filled the gallery. The court offered to consider a new trial motion after the July 4th holiday, but Esteban's defense attorney emailed the court on July 5, 2006, indicating that no such motion would be filed. The sentencing hearing took place on October 6, 2006. In his first public statement since the trial began, Esteban told the court that his life and health were fine until something happened one day that he could not control. Then, in tears, he apologized to the Allen family for what had occurred.
Every day, I face the facts of what I did and what happened.
The judge then sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, one without the possibility of parole for the crime against James, and an additional consecutive 20-year sentence for the aggravated assault on Madeleine. The judge harshly addressed the defendant, stating that the court had no doubt he was incorrigible. Thus, allowing even the possibility of parole was antithetical in a civilized society. The Attorney General released a statement hours later, praising the judgment as a gesture to honor the memory of one of the best officers of the Providence Police Department. Subsequently, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld the convictions and denied the defense's request to reduce the life sentence without parole. As for Madeleine, she recovered without complications. Since James's burial, Marge made it a habit to visit her husband's grave about 4 times a year. She always smiled, remembering that James rested near a cemetery path. After all, watching who passed by was part of his job. She consistently left floral arrangements that included a white rose, with no particular reason for choosing that color, but it became a tradition for the detective's widow. In 2015, on the 10th anniversary of her husband's death, Marge found the courage to consider her first interview. She acknowledged that, for the first 9 years, a physical pain in her chest prevented her from speaking. However, she eventually overcame the pain. During that interview with a reporter, she felt free to criticize the negative press often directed at law enforcement officers. Marge knew firsthand that police work is challenging and involves making difficult decisions. Once she broke her silence, she also addressed the numerous accusations of racism associated with her husband's case. When asked if speaking out would help her find closure, she disagreed with the term, stating there is no closure, just time that always flies by, gradually healing the wounds. Thanks for tuning in to Unreal True Crime. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new channel, Latin Crimes, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories of Latin America. Don't miss out. Subscribe now for more thrilling investigations.